and David Remnick joins me now. Welcome.
It's great to see you, Ari. I have to say, looking at Jamie Raskin, who does an epilogue for our edition of the report, looked like a waiter who knows that there's a fire in the kitchen and can't get the food out fast enough.
Well, as you say,
they get this thing out tonight because
yeah, you say he's involved.
I don't think they want to issue it on Christmas Eve.
Well, that's where we're headed. He's involved in more than one way, both in the investigation, as you mentioned, writing a piece where you've also written it in what will be one of the editions. But to begin with that point, why do you view this report as at least potentially so significant?
Well, it was so fascinating to watch you question Navarro and had to point out to him, is this a coup? Don't you realize that you're describing a coup d'etat? And he, of course, denies it. And it reminds me of a moment in my life, and much more importantly in world history. In August of 1991, the KGB staged a coup against Mikhail Gorbachev, you might remember. They locked him away down south in his vacation home. They took over the government, sent in the tanks, and they held power for 3 days. Half of them were drunk, it was incompetent, and so on and so forth. But there was a press conference at which this very young reporter, she couldn't have been more than 23, 24 years old, got up and faced off this very nervous vice president, Gennady Yunayev, and said, "Do you realize you've staged a coup d'etat?" And it was as if the shades had fallen from his eyes, that these clowns, I call these things what they are, these thugs around Trump wouldn't admit that this is a coup is just a very sad thing. What's emboldening, what's interesting is how many Republicans, how many Trumpists, how many loyalists, and how many young earnest aides like Hutchinson finally testified against Trump and described things for what they are and what they were.
Fascinating, the parallel you draw. And what you're speaking to is the potential power, sometimes, of truth, of evidence, even in a more closed society, the one you cited. But that's what some people want this to become, and Donald Trump and his ilk have proven effective at times of closed circles and information loops and exploiting things. Where does that fit into this idea that a lengthy government report, we believe could run north of 700 pages, will in some sense affect the truth, and the truth might help save us?
Well, because maybe it will prevent a repetition. Maybe if we study this report carefully enough, if we understand the roots of it, the political roots of it, in the Republican Party for a generation, if we study carefully enough the danger of these white nationalist and militia groups, and if we study the personality of the man who was president of this country for 4 years carefully enough, and begin to understand him not as a joke and not as a daily, knock-around subject on cable TV or in the columns of the press, but it's something really serious. The way we now study, they're not the same thing, but the way we study Stalin or many of the other autocrats of the past, then we'll understand something more purely about ourselves and our own history and how close we came to utter disaster for this democratic nation, how close we came. And by the way, the same thing we should think about these last midterm elections. We think, the red wave didn't happen, and it was an overwhelming Democratic victory in some ways. Well, wait a minute. A lot of these elections were super close. Mm-hmm. Nearly half the electorate in Georgia thought Herschel Walker was a better idea than Raphael Warnock. We shouldn't really get too far ahead of ourselves in thinking that we're well past the authoritarian temptation in this country.
Yeah, so you put it like that. I guess another thing I've been wanting to ask you when I was thinking about you coming on here, because as I've intimated to viewers, David Remnick is a guest we don't get as often as we want. That's just transparency. I wanted to ask you, given your work and your time as a foreign correspondent and your work on this New Yorker version of the report, about what you might call strategic nihilism, or courting the idea that nothing matters. Putin does it. Other autocrats do it with propaganda. Trump does it. Because it fits into this whole thing. Here, you and I are having this conversation, and there are readers and viewers who care. And we've pointed to examples of consequences. But the overriding response has not necessarily always been that didn't happen, denial, or that was okay. In law, we call that justification. It's been nothing matters, none of this matters, and you're a fool for caring. You're a fool for thinking there'll be accountability. You're a fool for thinking people are good, or a drag or a buzzkill for reading the report.
In other words, yeah, I think that Trump exhausts our patience and exhausts our attention after a while, because it wasn't that there was one scandal 2.5 years ago. There was a scandal every day. His rate of lying was so heroic, so constant, that the Washington Post could barely keep up with it on a daily basis. Look at this week. We have a former president of the United States has a major announcement. What is it? He's selling $99 NFTs of himself as a superhero. He just shows no self-awareness, no sense of alarm about what's happening to him. Meanwhile, we discover that it seems that he probably intimidated the IRS into taking a pass on looking at his taxes. We discover yet again what a terrible business person he was, living basically off the money and fumes of his father's fortune, his father who was a terrible Gonifan racist. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So it exhausts us. So we have to, at a certain point, as much as our daily and personal lives impinge on this and other subjects impinge, we have to pay attention. And I have no illusion, and I don't think you do, Ari, that people are going to get this report and immediately sit down and read something that is as long as Anna Karenina or War and Peace, and there's a good chance it might not be as beautifully written, in all due respect to the staffers. It's a hard thing to absorb. And so I think the committee took a very interesting point of view about how they not only would investigate this, but how they would present it. Almost like streaming TV in episodes, and then break it up into little pieces, and it went out into social, and you saw it on shows like your own. It was very clever. It's still happening. Today they released a transcript that revealed that, we had basically a mob lawyer in action. So maybe these things will penetrate bit by bit.
Yeah, that's a fair point as you sort of analyze how they're putting it to the country. And then the Justice Department are not a foreign body of international space aliens with no contact with the rest of the world. I've had we love our prosecutors, but sometimes they come on here and they go, well, it's independent. They don't react. And it's like up to a point, and no, we don't want them to ever react in a political or partisan manner. But they do exist on Earth as human beings, which brings me to what I want to ask you about this next part.
I have to assume the Justice Department and the special counsel, special prosecutor, is in fact audience number one.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber. Thanks for watching The Beat. I wanted to let you know I'm writing a foreword to the January 6th committee's full report, which is coming out soon from HarperCollins. You can go pre-order the book right now, and it'll come to you first when the report comes out in the fall or whenever the government releases it. Just search Melber Jan 6 on Amazon or your favorite independent book site and click pre-order. You'll be the first to get both the report and my new piece on the coup conspiracy. You can also go to melberbook.com and order it there.